Kouri Richins is a Utah mom who was working as a realtor when her husband died seemingly overnight in his sleep. It was later determined that he died from an overdose of fentanyl, and almost a year or a little over a year after his death, she was charged with his murder. Shortly after he passed away, the his family, her in laws, came to the house to collect some of his things and to get into a safe because he had changed his will and he had changed the executor of his estate to his sister. Kouri Richin punched her sister in law, amongst other things, when the sister in law came over to empty out his gun safe and some other things because they had become the executors of the estate, unbeknownst to Kouri. She didn't know that everything he had wasn't going to her at the time of his death. She was charged with a misdemeanor for that assault. That has just been recently back in court as well. We haven't talked about it a ton, but in between the time of the death and the assault of the sister in law in the garage and the arrest for the murder, she wrote a children's book about grief and was in the middle of promoting that children's book about grief when she was arrested for her husband's murder. So she has since been accused of his murder, of poisoning him with fentanyl. He had a substantial amount, 4 or 5 times a lethal dose in his system. And when police went to the home to respond to a unresponsive person, there was no indicia of narcotic use near him. So normally when you see an OD, you will see what the person had been taking. If it's an accidental overdose, none of that was there. It's wild. And then while she was in custody, she was writing a letter that she says is a novel. Yes, I'm using air quotes liberally because the walk the dog letter seems to say to her mother and brother that they need to get their stories straight and they need to remember that Eric had spent time in Mexico and he was always doing drugs in Mexico with his friends, and then it's about her being in prison, but it's really fictional. Wild. So some of that stuff has just gotten turned over as well from the defense attorneys to the prosecution because apparently the walk the dog letter is part of a larger transcript. Some of that has been ruled attorney-client privilege documents that the prosecution's not going to get, but there's a second letter that the prosecution is getting. And then we covered this crazy transcript of a phone call with her brother. This case is absolutely wild. So most things have been going on under seal, and there haven't been any new court hearings until the media started reporting this unsealed search warrant. So we have the whole search warrant. We're going to go through it all ourselves. We're going to talk about this misdemeanor case just a little bit and the hearings that have since been scheduled. If the judge sentences her on the misdemeanor, what happens? She gets 6 months in custody on the misdemeanor, probably concurrent or time served because she's been in custody since May 2023. So even if they do just sentence her on the misdemeanor, it'd be like she's already served the time and it would just go on her record and nothing much more would happen from it. So it just depends on how much she cares about that misdemeanor being on her record while she is facing aggravated first-degree murder charges. Though there are reports coming out that the state is proceeding against her as a life case and not a death penalty case. So I guess there are some positives for her in that. I imagine that she's not going to love, and again, I don't know Kouri Richins from anyone, but I've read the walk the dog letter. I've read the phone conversation with her brother, with all of you. She hated the media attention in this case. She and her brother hated the way this case was being discussed. And I imagine that they're not going to love all the information in this affidavit for a search warrant coming to light. What we learned from the search warrant in the Kouri Richins case is that her mother, Lisa Darden, was also being looked at by law enforcement in a search warrant affidavit as an application to search the phone for all contacts of Kouri Richins' mother, Lisa. Law enforcement laid out that Lisa had a romantic partner die unexpectedly shortly after the partner named Lisa Darden as the beneficiary of her estate. That partner died from an overdose of oxycodone. However, it was something that she was prescribed and something that she had been struggling with, but it was not a circumstance where she had stopped using oxycodone and then relapsed into using it. So law enforcement made the connection that the mother's close proximity to the unexpected death of her partner shortly after being made the beneficiary of the estate, the fact that Lisa Darden was there at least earlier in the evening, the night that Eric Richins died. Law enforcement said, quote, "It is possible that she was involved in the planning and orchestrating of Eric's death." They also said that there were quite a lot of communications between Kouri and her mother, indicating not only the closeness of their relationship, but the fact that Kouri's mother had, quote, disdain for Eric Richins, the victim in this case. Has she been charged? No. Will she be charged? Maybe not. That suspicious death was in 2006. But you know what we've all learned from the cases I cover here on the channel? There is no statute of limitation on homicide cases. So if new information comes up in those search warrants related to that unexpected death in 2006, it is possible. Could we see her charged in connection with Kouri Richins' case? That has not happened yet, but I'm sure law enforcement is keeping a very close eye on jail communications between Kouri and her mother. And I wonder if that's why Kouri was communicating through her brother and through the walk the dog letter to instruct her mom about certain things. It certainly is an unusual twist in what has been a very unusual case. I didn't expect this at all, but it's weird, isn't it? We'll see what happens with this. Kouri Richins will be back in court May 15th for a preliminary hearing. I will be covering that live because I am fascinated to see what else comes out in this case. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at lawnerdapp.com, our free app for iOS and Android.